Imagine spending years building the greatest wall on Earth, only to watch your enemy ride around it. That happened more than once in ancient China. The Great Wall is one of the most famous structures ever built. But almost everything people believe about it is either incomplete or completely wrong. It wasn't built by one emperor. It wasn't built during one dynasty, and it wasn't even built for just one reason. Over nearly 2,000 years, the wall kept changing because China kept changing. Sometimes it defended an empire. Sometimes it protected trade. Sometimes it controlled who could enter and who could leave. The wall became one of the largest military systems ever created. Yet it still failed more than once. So if the Great Wall couldn't always stop invasions, why did emperor after emperor keep rebuilding it? The answer begins long before the Great Wall ever existed. More than 200-300 years ago, there was no country called China. Instead, the land was divided into powerful kingdoms that constantly competed for land, wealth, and survival. This period became known as the Warring States period. 7 major kingdoms struggled for dominance, forming alliances one year and fighting each other the next. Every kingdom faced the same terrifying problem. An enemy could appear with little warning, crossing open plains and attacking villages before soldiers had time to respond. So instead of building one enormous wall, each kingdom built its own smaller defensive barriers wherever they needed protection. These early walls looked nothing like the stone structure tourists visit today. Most were made from packed earth, gravel, wood, and anything builders could find nearby. Building with packed earth was surprisingly effective. Layer after layer was compressed until it became incredibly hard, allowing these walls to survive for centuries in dry climates. But these walls weren't only built to stop neighboring kingdoms. An even greater threat lived beyond China's northern frontier. North of the kingdom stretched the vast Eurasian steppe. It was open, flat, and perfect for horse-riding nomads who could travel farther and faster than almost any army. Unlike farmers, these nomadic groups didn't depend on cities or permanent settlements. Their mobility made them incredibly difficult to predict, and even harder to defeat. One kingdom would eventually realize that surviving wasn't enough. If it wanted lasting peace, it had to unite every rival and every wall. That kingdom was Qin. In 221 BC, after decades of brutal warfare, the kingdom of Qin defeated its last rival. For the first time in history, most of China was united under a single ruler. That ruler called himself Qin Shi Huang, meaning the first emperor. He believed his empire would last for 10,000 generations. To keep such a massive empire under control, he introduced sweeping reforms. He standardized coins, writing weights, measurements, and even the width of wagon roads. But one problem still remained. The northern frontier stretched for thousands of kilometers, and mounted raiders could strike almost anywhere. This is where one of history's biggest myths begins. Qin Shi Huang did not build the Great Wall from nothing. Instead, he ordered workers and soldiers to repair, extend, and connect walls that earlier kingdoms had already built. It wasn't one continuous construction project. Different sections were built using different materials, by different people, in completely different landscapes. Thousands of workers, soldiers, and prisoners were sent north to build and maintain these defenses. The work was exhausting, dangerous, and often deadly. Even after the construction ended, the wall required constant repairs. Rain, wind, floods, and erosion slowly damaged every section, forcing each generation to rebuild what the previous one had finished. But if the emperor invested so much time, money, and manpower into these walls, who exactly was he so afraid of? The answer wasn't another kingdom. It was a people who rarely built cities at all. The greatest threat to the Qin Empire wasn't hiding behind another wall. It lived beyond the northern grasslands, where an enormous confederation of nomadic tribes had mastered one weapon better than anyone else: the horse. These people were known as the Xiongnu. Instead of building cities surrounded by walls, they lived across the vast Eurasian steppe, moving wherever food and water could be found. Their greatest advantage was speed. A farming army marched on foot, a nomadic army rode on horseback. By the time news of an attack reached the nearest city, the raiders were often already gone. The Xiongnu didn't always invade to conquer cities. Many raids were fast strikes for horses, food, metal tools, and supplies before disappearing back into the grasslands. That completely changed the purpose of the wall. It wasn't supposed to make invasion impossible. It was supposed to make surprise impossible. A raiding force now had to search for a weak point, climb the wall, break through a gate, or ride around the end. Every extra minute increased the defender's chance of responding. And time was exactly what the wall was designed to create, because the most powerful weapon on the Great Wall wasn't the stone. It was communication. During the day, soldiers sent smoke into the sky. At night, they lit enormous beacon fires. One warning could travel hundreds of kilometers in only a few hours. Long before telegraphs, radios, or telephones, China had built one of the fastest military communication networks on Earth. The Great Wall was no longer just a barrier. It had become a giant military system stretching across northern China. But centuries later, another dynasty would transform it into the wall the world recognizes today. By the time the Ming Dynasty came to power in 1368, the Great Wall was already ancient. Large sections had collapsed, others had been abandoned, and many existed only as weathered ridges of packed earth. Then another powerful enemy emerged. The Mongols had built the largest land empire in history, and although their empire later fractured, they remained a constant threat along China's northern frontier. The Ming emperors reached a different conclusion than their predecessors. Instead of relying mainly on armies in the field, they decided to strengthen the border itself. This time, the walls were built to last. Builders replaced many older earth barriers with millions of bricks and carefully cut stone that could survive harsh weather for centuries. The wall followed mountain ridges whenever possible. Nature became part of the defense, forcing attackers to climb steep slopes before they even reached the fortifications. Watchtowers appeared every few hundred meters. Soldiers could observe huge stretches of land, store supplies, rest between patrols, and send emergency signals across the frontier. Some mountain passes became enormous fortresses. Gates were heavily defended because everyone entering or leaving northern China had to pass through them. These gates weren't only military checkpoints. Officials collected taxes, inspected goods, recorded travelers, and controlled trade between China and the outside world. In other words, the Great Wall had become something much larger than a defensive structure. It functioned as a military highway, an early warning network, a customs office, and an international border, all at the same time. But even the strongest wall in the world had one weakness. It depended on the people guarding it, and history proved that stone was never the easiest way into an empire. Sometimes, all it took was a single open gate. For centuries, the Great Wall delayed invasions, protected trade routes, and warned defenders of approaching enemies. But no wall is stronger than the people guarding it. Many people imagine invaders smashing through the Great Wall. That rarely happened. More often, they searched for something much easier, a gateway or an ally. The greatest example came in 1644. The Ming Dynasty wasn't collapsing because the wall had failed. It was collapsing because the empire itself was falling apart. Peasant rebellions swept across the country. Government finances collapsed. The emperor's armies were exhausted after years of fighting on multiple fronts. The danger now came from both inside and outside the empire. Then one general made a decision that changed Chinese history forever. His name was Wu Sangui. Facing rebel forces advancing toward Beijing, Wu Sangui chose to form an alliance with the Manchus, another powerful people living beyond the Great Wall. It was a desperate gamble. To allow his new allies into China, Wu Sangui opened the gates at Shanhai Pass, one of the most important gateways in the entire Great Wall. Together, they defeated the rebels. But once the Manchus entered China, they didn't leave. Instead, they took control of the empire. The Qing dynasty would rule China for nearly 3 centuries. Ironically, the greatest breach of the Great Wall wasn't caused by a siege. It happened because someone inside chose to open the gate. The Great Wall had done exactly what it was designed to do. It delayed enemies. It protected the frontier. It bought precious time. But it could never solve the problems inside the empire itself. And that may be the most important lesson the wall has to teach. By now, the Great Wall had survived dynasties, invasions, and centuries of change. But perhaps its greatest legacy isn't the wall itself. It's the myths people still believe about it. The most famous myth claims the Great Wall is the only human-made structure visible from space. It isn't. Astronauts have repeatedly explained that, without special conditions or equipment, the wall is extremely difficult to see from orbit. Another common belief is that the Great Wall is one continuous wall stretching across China. In reality, it's a vast network of walls, trenches, mountain barriers, and fortresses built over many centuries. Even its length surprises people. Modern archaeological surveys estimate the entire defensive system measures more than 21,000 kilometers when every branch and section is included. People also say millions died building the Great Wall. Construction was certainly dangerous, and countless workers lost their lives over centuries. But historians still debate the exact number, and no reliable record confirms the popular claim. Another legend says workers were buried inside the wall itself. Archaeologists have found no convincing evidence that human bodies were used as building material. The story survives because it reflects how brutal construction could be, not because it has been proven true. Ironically, many of the best preserved sections aren't the oldest. Most visitors today walk on walls rebuilt during the Ming Dynasty, hundreds of years after Qin Shi Huang. That means the Great Wall people imagine today is really a collection of different walls from different centuries, built by different dynasties for different reasons. The Great Wall isn't a single monument. It's the story of how one civilization kept adapting to new threats for more than 2,000 years. And once you understand that, the Great Wall stops looking like the world's biggest wall. It starts looking like the world's longest lesson in adaptation. Today, millions of people walk along the Great Wall every year. Most admire its size. Few realize they're walking through more than 2,000 years of changing history. Every stone tells the story of a different generation. Some were laid by kingdoms fighting their neighbors, others by emperors protecting a new empire, and many by the Ming Dynasty, preparing for a threat from the north. No single ruler built the Great Wall. No single dynasty finished it, and no single purpose explains why it exists. That complexity is what makes it extraordinary. History often remembers monuments, but monuments are really records of decisions. Every brick in the wall represents someone responding to the problems of their own time. The kingdoms feared invasion. Qin feared losing a new empire. The Ming feared the return of powerful horsemen. Each generation faced a different challenge, so each generation built a different wall. That's why asking, why was the Great Wall built, has no single answer. The better question is, why did people keep rebuilding it? Because every generation inherited the same border, but not the same problems. That idea reaches far beyond ancient China. Throughout history, civilizations have constantly adapted their defenses as new threats emerged. The Great Wall is simply one of history's clearest examples. And perhaps that's the wall's greatest lesson. It was never meant to make China impossible to invade. It was meant to make China harder to defeat. There is a difference. The Great Wall didn't promise victory, it promised opportunity. Opportunity to prepare. Opportunity to respond. Opportunity to survive. Think back to the beginning of this story. An enemy rode around the wall. At first, that sounds like proof the wall failed. But history tells a different story. The wall wasn't expected to stop every attack. It was expected to slow attacks, reveal attacks, and give an empire time to react. Measured that way, it succeeded far more often than people realize. Even when enemies crossed it, they rarely crossed it unnoticed. And that changed everything. The Great Wall wasn't simply built from stone. It was built from communication, planning, and thousands of years of experience. That's why it became one of the greatest engineering projects in human history. Not because it was the tallest. Not because it was impossible to cross. But because it kept evolving. Empires that refuse to adapt often disappear. The Great Wall reminds us that survival isn't about building something once. It's about improving it again and again. Perhaps that's the real reason the Great Wall still captures our imagination. It isn't a monument to fear, it's a monument to preparation. For over 2,000 years, rulers changed, dynasties rose and fell, wars began and ended. But the need to prepare for tomorrow never disappeared. And that's why the Great Wall is still standing. Not because it was perfect, but because generation after generation refused to abandon it. The Great Wall wasn't built in a single lifetime. It became one of humanity's greatest achievements, because millions of people across centuries continued a project they would never see completed. That may be the wall's greatest legacy. Some of history's most important achievements aren't finished by one person, or even one generation. The Great Wall began as scattered barriers between rival kingdoms. It became the backbone of an empire, and today, it stands as one of the most recognizable landmarks on Earth. Its greatest strength was never the bricks, it was the idea behind them. Because sometimes, the strongest defense isn't the one that can never be crossed. It's the one that gives you one more chance. And that was the real reason the Great Wall of China was built. It wasn't built to create an unbeatable empire. It was built to protect one long enough to endure. More than 2,000 years later, the wall is still doing exactly what it was meant to do. Not by defending China, but by reminding the world that preparation can outlast even the greatest empires.